I need to talk about something that's been absolutely infuriating. Me. I need to talk about something that's been absolutely infuriating me lately. I've been scrolling social media. I'm looking at posts from people I've known for years, people I used to respect, people that I thought had at least some basic level of critical thinking. And what am I seeing? The most sickening rhetoric imaginable about ICE, about federal immigration enforcement, about what's happening in Minneapolis and across the country. These people are losing their minds over the removal of convicted criminals. They're calling ICE agents fascists for enforcing the law. They're treating gang members and welfare fraudsters like victims. They've defended obstruction of federal operations as heroic resistance. And I'm sitting here wondering, how did we get here? How did 90% of these people lose the ability to think for themselves? How did so many people get completely indoctrinated by the media and the Democratic Party that they can't even process basic facts anymore? You know what happens when you present these people with facts? You show them the actual statistics, the actual crimes committed by the people being deported, the actual evidence of what's happening. They don't engage. They don't reconsider. They have a tantrum. They deflect. They get violent. They act like 2-year-olds who've been told they can't have candy. This is what the Democratic Party and the liberal media have done to the average person's ability to reason. They've destroyed it. They've replaced logic with emotion, replaced facts with narratives, replaced critical thinking with tribalism. And now we're dealing with the consequences. People who think obstructing federal agents is righteous, people who think that using a vehicle as a weapon against law enforcement is justified, people who have completely lost the ability to understand that the law is not optional, that the Constitution is not a suggestion, that when a federal agent gives you a lawful order, you comply. So let me be very clear about something right from the start. Everything the left wants is un-American. Every policy they push violates the Constitution. Every action they take undermines the rule of law. And I'm done pretending that their ideology deserves equal consideration with the actual American values. This episode is about the siege of the Republic. It's about how indoctrination has turned otherwise functional people into simpletons who can't tell the difference between law enforcement and tyranny. It's about weaponization of vehicles, of federal agents. It's about the media's deliberate cover-up of who's actually being deported and why. And it's about the manufactured outrage that has led to riots and violence, while previous administrations deported millions without a single protest. If you're one of the people posting that sickening rhetoric about ICE, then this is for you. And you're not going to like it, but you need to hear it. Let me tell you exactly what I've been seeing on my feeds lately from people who call themselves my friends. Posts defending Renee Good as if she was some innocent bystander murdered by out-of-control federal agents. Posts calling ICE a terrorist organization. Posts comparing immigration enforcement to Nazi Germany. Posts demanding that federal agents be arrested and prosecuted for doing their jobs. And here's the question I keep asking myself. What do these people think is going to happen to someone who not only obstructs the federal operations, but assaults a federal agent with a vehicle? Do they genuinely not understand that a vehicle is a weapon? Do they actually believe that you can accelerate a multi-ton piece of machinery towards a federal officer and expect no consequences? Are they really that disconnected from reality? Yes. Yes, they are. Because yes, a vehicle is absolutely a weapon. But I don't expect you simpletons to understand that. I don't expect you to grasp basic physics or threat assessment or the reality of what it means when someone weaponizes a car against a human being. I honestly wonder how 90% of you function in daily life. How do you hold jobs? How do you make decisions? How do you navigate the world when you've lost the ability to think logically, to assess cause and effect, to understand that actions have consequences? And what infuriates me more than anything is that you people have lost your own sense of self so completely to the lies of your political party and the liberal media that you can't even recognize what's happened to you. You've traded your ability to think independently for partisan talking points. You've surrendered your common sense for tribal loyalty. You've given up your capacity for reason in exchange for the comfort of belonging to a group that tells you what to believe. I'm not asking you to become conservative. I'm not asking you to agree with every policy decision. I'm asking you to learn to think for yourselves again. Look up the facts about the misinformation that the media is spreading. Verify the claims before you share them. Ask basic questions about whether what you're being told makes sense. But I don't expect you to do that, because the media and the Democrats have messed you up so bad that every time someone presents you with facts, with actual evidence, with verifiable data, you go completely off the rails. You deflect to something else. You have a tantrum like a fucking 2-year-old being told no. You get violent and start attacking anybody that disagrees with you. Why? Are you people really that far gone that you've lost all logic and reasonable thinking skills? Has the indoctrination been so complete that you can't even process information that contradicts the narratives you've been fed? I've talked about the 100% failure rate of socialism in a previous episode, and I'm not going to repeat all of that here. But understand this. The things that you want, the things that you expect, the policies that you support are fundamentally un-American. Everything you do goes against the Constitution and the law of the land. You want open borders? That violates national sovereignty. You want sanctuary cities that refuse to cooperate with federal immigration enforcement. That violates the Supremacy Clause. You want to abolish ICE. That means abandoning any pretense of immigration law. You want to protect criminals from deportation. That means prioritizing illegal aliens over American citizens. None of this is compatible with the Constitution. None of this is compatible with the rule of law. None of this is compatible with the basic concept of national sovereignty that every country in the world recognizes as fundamental. And when federal agents show up to enforce the law, when they execute warrants issued by federal judges, when they attempt to remove people who've been convicted of crimes and ordered deported, you need to understand something very simple. Learn how to obey the law and obey lawful orders. Stay your asses at home. Allow federal agents to do their jobs. Stop interfering with law enforcement operations. Stop blocking roads. Stop forming human shields around convicted predators. Stop weaponizing your vehicles against agents. Because if you don't, if you continue down this path of resistance and obstruction, you're going to face the consequences. And those consequences are your fault, not the fault of the agents who are forced to respond to your illegal actions. Here's what really gets me. Here's what exposes the entire manufactured nature of this outrage. Let me give you some numbers, real numbers, historical facts that you can verify if you have even a shred of intellectual honesty left. Bill Clinton deported 12.5 million people during his presidency. 12.5 million. Do you remember riots in the streets? Do you remember protests? Do you remember cities burning? No. Because there weren't any. 0 riots, 0 protests. It wasn't even controversial. George W. Bush deported 10.3 million people. 10.3 million. Do you remember the media losing their minds? Do you remember activists forming human chains to prevent ICE from doing their jobs? Nope, because it didn't happen. 0 riots, 0 protests. Barack Obama, he deported 5.2 million people. The left loved Obama. He was their fucking hero. He could do no wrong. And he deported more than 5 million people, and nobody said a word. 0 riots, 0 protests. Now let's talk about Trump. In his first term, he removed 1.5 million illegal criminals. Not total deportations. Not everyone who was here illegally. Specifically, criminals who had been convicted of crimes in American courts. 1.5 million of the worst offenders. And what was the response? 350 riots. Not protests, riots. Cities burning, stores being looted, people being attacked and killed for disagreeing with the mob. Let me repeat those numbers so they sink in. Clinton, 12.5 million deported, 0 riots. Bush, 10.3 million deported, 0 riots. Obama, 5.2 million deported, 0 riots. Trump, 1.5 million. Criminals removed. 350 riots. Do you see the problem here? Do you understand what this tells you? It was never about the deportations. It was never about the immigration policy. It was never about families being separated or communities being disrupted. It was always about one thing: the left's pathological hatred for Donald Trump. You indoctrinated simpletons have burned city after city. You've looted businesses for no reason other than you felt like it. You started killing people who disagree with your views because you've forgotten to have a conversation like adults. And you call these riots protests. You call this destruction peaceful. You call this violence resistance. You've completely lost the ability to use language honestly, to describe reality accurately, to acknowledge what you're actually doing. A riot is not a protest. Burning buildings is not peaceful. Killing people who disagree with you is not resistance, it's terrorism. It's mob violence. It's complete breakdown of civil society. And all of it, every bit of it, is happening because the media and the Democratic Party spent years conditioning you to believe that Trump is literally Hitler, that anyone who supports him is a Nazi, that any policy he implements is fascism, and that resistance by any means necessary is not just acceptable, but morally required. They broke your brains. They destroyed your ability to reason. They turned you into useful idiots who will burn down your own cities, attack your own neighbors, and defend the worst criminals imaginable because you've been programmed to believe that the real enemy is the man trying to enforce the law. This is what indoctrination looks like. This is what happens when an entire political party and media apparatus decides that winning is more important than the truth, that power is more important than integrity, that the narrative is more important than the facts. And you fell for it. Every single one of you posting that sickening rhetoric about ICE, every person defending obstruction of federal agents, every activist forming human shields around convicted predators fell for the lie. You've traded your sanity for a media narrative, and now you can't find your way back. Let me break down something very simple for the simpletons in the back who still don't understand basic physics or how threat assessment works in law enforcement. A vehicle is a weapon, not metaphorically, not symbolically, actually and literally a weapon. A multi-ton piece of machinery that can kill or seriously injure a human being just as effectively as a gun or a knife. When someone uses a vehicle to assault another person, when they accelerate that vehicle towards someone, when they weaponize it by turning it into a battering ram or a tool for running people over, they're committing assault with a deadly weapon. And law enforcement is trained to respond with deadly threats with appropriate force, which often means lethal force. It's not complicated. This isn't controversial. This is basic reality that everyone should understand, but apparently I need to explain it because so many of you have lost the ability to grasp cause and effect. Now, let's talk about what actually happened on Portland Avenue in Minneapolis. Let's go through the facts, the timeline, the actions that led directly to Renee Good's death. Renee Good didn't just happen to be in the area. She wasn't a random bystander who got caught up in something she didn't understand. She was part of the ICE Watch Network, a group of activists specifically organized to monitor and disrupt federal immigration enforcement operations. She followed ICE vehicles for several minutes. She tracked their movements, she waited for an opportunity to interfere, and when federal agents completed an arrest, she began transporting the subject to a secure facility. She made her move. She accelerated ahead of the convoy. She positioned her vehicle diagonally across Portland Avenue. This wasn't a parking mistake. It wasn't confusion about where she was allowed to be. It was deliberate. It was tactical obstruction. She created a physical barrier designed to prevent federal agents from moving their prisoner. That's not observing. It's not documenting. It's active interference with federal law enforcement operation. And that's a crime. Federal agents approached her vehicle. They identified themselves. They gave clear, direct, loud orders. Get out of the car. Move your vehicle. You're obstructing a federal operation. These weren't suggestions. These weren't requests. These were lawful orders from federal agents who have the authority to give those orders. Renee Good's response? That's fine, dude. I'm not mad at you. Like she was having a casual conversation with a friend. And I talked about this last week. Like federal agents executing a warrant were just making a suggestion she could take or leave. Like the law was optional and she could decide whether or not to comply based on how she felt about it. The agents repeated the orders multiple times, louder, more insistent. Exit the vehicle, move now, this is your last warning. And here's where it gets critical. Renee Good had her companion in the vehicle with her, Rebecca Good, her wife. And as the situation escalated, as the agents were giving their final warnings, Rebecca made a choice that sealed Renee's fate. She taunted the agents. She said to the one guy, "Go get some lunch, big boy," mocking the federal officers trying to safely transport a prisoner. Treating a serious law enforcement situation like it was a joke. And then came the fatal command. The 3 words that Rebecca Good would have to live with for the rest of her life. Drive, baby, drive. And Renee Good hit the gas. She accelerated her vehicle directly towards Agent Jonathan Ross. Now let's talk about Agent Ross's reality in that moment. This man had been a victim of vehicular assault just 6 months earlier. During another enforcement operation, a suspect tried to flee by running him over. Agent Ross was dragged more than 100 yards by the guy's vehicle. He suffered serious injuries. He knows exactly what it felt like to be targeted with a car as a weapon because it's happened to him. So when he sees a vehicle that's already been used to obstruct a federal operation, when he hears the driver being told to drive, when he sees that vehicle accelerate towards him, what's he supposed to think? What's he supposed to do? He's got a fraction of a second to make a decision. Is this person going to run me over? Am I about to be dragged across the pavement again? Am I about to be killed or seriously injured by someone who's already demonstrated that they don't respect federal authority and they're willing to use their vehicle as a weapon? Based on his training, his experience, and the immediate tactical situation, Agent Ross assessed the threat and responded with lethal force. He fired. Renee Good was struck. She died from her injuries. And I want to be absolutely clear about something. Agent Ross acted lawfully. He followed his training. He protected himself from what he reasonably perceived as a lethal threat. He did exactly what any law enforcement officer would do in that situation. Renee Good created that situation. She chose to follow ICE vehicles. She chose to block the roadway. She chose to ignore repeated lawful orders. And she chose to accelerate her vehicle toward a federal agent after being commanded to drive by her companion. Every single one of those choices was hers. Every single one of them was illegal. And the final choice, the acceleration toward Agent Ross, was the one that justified lethal force. But Here's what the indoctrinated simpletons don't want to acknowledge. Renee Good is not a martyr. She's not a hero. She's not a symbol of resistance against tyranny. She's a casualty of the Democratic Socialist Party's lies. She's a victim of years of propaganda telling her that ICE is evil, that federal agents are fascists, that immigration enforcement is illegitimate, that resistance is righteous. The Democratic Party killed Renee Good. The media killed Renee Good. The ICE Watch organizers killed Renee Good. Every activist, every politician, every talking head who spent years delegitimizing federal immigration enforcement and radicalizing civilians into believing that obstruction was heroic bears responsibility for her death. Agent Ross didn't want to shoot her, but she didn't give him a choice. She weaponized her vehicle. She created the threat. She forced his hand. And now the same people who radicalized her are using her death to attack the agents who had no choice but to defend themselves. They're calling for investigations. They're demanding prosecutions. They're pushing a narrative that ignores every choice Renee Good made that led to that moment. This is what indoctrination procedures, people who will commit felonies because they've been convinced the law doesn't apply to them. People who will assault federal agents because they've been taught that resistance is righteous. People who will die because they've been radicalized into believing that federal authority is illegitimate. Renee Good is dead because of what the left taught her to believe. And until the left stops radicalizing people, until they stop delegitimizing law enforcement, until they stop celebrating obstruction as heroism, more people are going to die the same way. Now, let me tell you about a story that the media is deliberately ignoring because it completely destroys their narrative about Operation MetroServe and immigration enforcement. On January 8th, immigration enforcement in Portland, Oregon, federal agents, they conducted a targeted traffic stop of two individuals with active warrants. Both Venezuelan nationals, both in the country illegally, both confirmed members of Tren de Aragua, one of the most violent transnational criminal gangs in the Western Hemisphere. Lewis entered the United States illegally in 2022. He was processed and released under the Biden administration's catch and release policies. He had a final order of removal from a federal immigration judge. That means he'd gone through legal process, he had his case heard, and he was ordered to leave the country. He didn't leave. He stayed, and he joined the gang. Yorlanis crossed the border illegally near El Paso, Texas in 2023. The Department of Homeland Security has identified her as being associated with the gang and affiliated with a prostitution ring linked to the gang. She wasn't selling flowers on a street corner. She was part of a human trafficking operation that exploits women and children. These aren't sympathetic figures. These are not people trying to find a better life. These are criminal gang members involved in some of the most heinous activities imaginable. When federal agents approached their vehicle and ordered them to comply, what did they do? The exact same thing Renee Good did. They weaponized their vehicle. They tried to run over federal agents. And just like in Minneapolis, the agents responded with lethal force. Nino Mancada was shot in the arm. Zambrano was shot in the chest. They both survived. Both are in federal custody. Both are facing justice. Now here's the question you should be asking. Why is there complete silence about this incident in the mainstream media? Where's the wall-to-wall coverage? Where are the protests? Where are the candlelight vigils? Where are the politicians calling for investigations and accountability? Silence. Complete and total silence. And you know exactly why. Because there's no way to spin this story to fit the narrative. There's no way to turn these people into sympathetic figures. There's no way to frame them as innocent victims. There's no way to make Tren de Aragua human trafficking operative sound like a poet or a mother or a concerned community member. The facts are too clear. The criminal connections are too obvious. The gang affiliation is too well documented. There's no angle the media can use to make this about federal overreach or immigration enforcement gone wrong, so they bury it. They ignore it. They pretend it didn't happen. But this incident is critically important because it shows a pattern. The drive, baby, drive mentality that got Renee Good killed in Minneapolis is spreading. Criminal aliens and radicalized civilians alike are now using vehicles to attack federal agents. They saw what happened in Minneapolis. They saw the media coverage condemning ICE. They saw protests. They saw politicians attacking federal agents. And they calculated that maybe, just maybe, if they tried to run over agents, those agents would hesitate. Maybe the fear of political backlash would make them hold their fire. And they were wrong. Just like Renee Good was wrong. But the fact that these gang members tried, it just tells you everything about what the left's rhetoric is producing. When you spend years delegitimizing federal immigration enforcement, when you call ICE agents fascist and terrorists, when you celebrate resistance and obstruction, you create an environment where criminals think they can attack federal agents with impunity. These are the people ICE is clearing out. Not families trying to find work, not dreamers who were brought here as children, not economic migrants looking for opportunity, gang members involved in human trafficking, prostitution rings, the distribution of fentanyl, violent crimes. And while federal agents are trying to remove these predators from American communities, what is the left doing? They're forming human shields to protect them. They're blocking roads to prevent arrests. They're creating sanctuary policies that make it impossible for local law enforcement to cooperate with federal authorities. You want to know who the real enemy is? It's not ICE. It's not immigration enforcement. It's the people standing between agents and the criminals they're trying to remove. It's the politicians who create sanctuary policies. It's the activists who organize obstruction networks. It's the media that refuses to cover stories like Portland because they can't be spun to fit the narrative. Those two people are exactly who Operation Metro Surge is designed to target. They're criminals with extensive gang connections involved in the exploitation of vulnerable people. They had final orders of removal. They should have been gone years ago. But sanctuary policies and the breakdown of immigration enforcement under the previous administration allowed them to stay, to operate, to victimize people. And when federal agents finally showed up to enforce the law, these gang members did exactly what radicalized civilians like Renee Good did. They weaponized their vehicle. They tried to run over agents. They forced a lethal response. The difference is that nobody's making martyrs out of Tren de Aragua gang members. Nobody is organizing protests for human traffickers. Nobody's calling investigations into why agents shot people who were trying to kill them. Because even the most indoctrinated simpleton can understand that you can't turn a gang member involved in prostitution rings into a sympathetic figure. But understand this. The only difference between Renee Good and Lewis is optics. Both weaponized vehicles against federal agents. Both ignored lawful orders. Both forced agents to respond with lethal force. Both made choices that resulted in them being shot. The left can make a martyr out of Renee Good because she fits the narrative. White woman, poet, mother, concerned citizen. They can craft a story around her that ignores her actual actions and focuses on her identity. They can't do that with Venezuelan gang members involved in human trafficking. So they ignore Portland entirely and hope you never hear about it. But you need to hear about it. You need to understand the pattern. You need to recognize that the resistance the left is calling for, the obstruction that they're celebrating, the attacks on federal agents that they're defending, all of it is creating an environment where criminals think they can assault law enforcement with vehicles and face no consequences. And you need to understand who benefits from that environment. Not American citizens, not legal immigrants, not vulnerable people trying to escape poverty or violence. The people that benefit are gang members, human traffickers, drug dealers, and convicted criminals who should have been deported years ago. That's who the left is defending. That's who they're forming human shields around. That's who they're prioritizing over your safety, over your children's safety, over the rule of law. Now, let me take you back to about 10 years ago, back before Trump announced his campaign for president, back when he was just a celebrity businessman and a reality TV star. Do you remember how the left felt about Donald Trump back then? They loved him. Celebrities wanted to be photographed with him. Politicians courted his endorsements and donations. The media covered him favorably. He was welcome on all talk shows, at galas, at Democratic fundraisers. Nobody called him a racist. Nobody called him fascist. Nobody compared him to Hitler. He was just Trump. Rich, famous, entertaining, a little controversial, but mostly harmless. And then he made an announcement. He was running for president. And not just running for president, but running as a Republican against Hillary Clinton. And everything changed overnight. The moment that Trump became a threat to the Democratic power, the movement he stood, or the moment that he stood between Hillary Clinton and the presidency that she believed she was owed, the media launched a psychological warfare campaign unlike anything we've ever seen in American politics. Every aspect of his life was suddenly fair game for attack. Business dealings from decades ago were dug up and spun as evidence of corruption. Relationships were examined and reframed as proof of various character flaws. Statements from years past were taken out of context and weaponized. Every word he spoke was analyzed, dissected, and interpreted in the most negative way possible. The media didn't just oppose Trump's candidacy, they declared total war on Donald Trump as a person. They weren't content to criticize his policies or question his qualifications. They set out to destroy him completely, to make him so toxic nobody would support him, to paint him as the greatest threat to democracy since actual fascism. And the transformation this created in ordinary people was astonishing. Your friends, your family members, your coworkers, people who had never particularly cared about politics, who had never expressed strong partisan views, who had lived normal, functional lives, suddenly became obsessed with hating Trump. They traded their sanity for a media narrative. They abandoned their ability to think critically in favor of emotional reactions programmed by the cable news and social media. They became what I can only describe as indoctrinated twats who lost every shred of independent thought they might have once possessed. This is how you got friends posting sickening rhetoric about ICE. This is how you got people defending obstruction of federal agents. This is how you got otherwise functioning adults losing their minds over immigration enforcement that's been standard practice under every administration for decades. They were conditioned systematically, relentlessly, to believe that Trump represents existential evil, that anyone who supports him is deplorable, that any policy he implements must be opposed by any means necessary. The media didn't just criticize Trump, they taught your friends and neighbors to hate him with a visceral intensity that overrode logic, facts, and their own values. They created an environment where rational discussion became impossible because Trump's very existence triggered an emotional response so strong that people couldn't process information about his actual policies or actions. And now, years later, even after he's been proven right on issue after issue, even after the lies about Russian collusion were exposed, even after the media's narratives fell apart one by one, these people can't let go of the programming. They're so invested in the narrative that admitting they were wrong, that they were manipulated, that they fell for the propaganda would destroy their entire sense of self. So they double down. They find new reasons to hate him. They defend positions that make no sense. They attack policies they would have supported under any other president. This is what happened in 2016. This is when the sheeple were made. This is when otherwise reasonable people became radicalized into a cult-like devotion to opposing one man, regardless of what he actually does or what the consequences of that opposition might be. And the Democratic Party and the media know exactly what they did. They know they broke these people's brains. They know they created an army of useful idiots who will believe anything, defend anything, excuse anything, as long as it's positioned as resistance to Trump. That's why you have riots over deportations that are a fraction of what previous administrations did. That's why you have people defending gang members and criminals. That's why you have activists forming human shields around convicted predators. That's why you have people weaponizing vehicles against federal agents. Because they're not thinking anymore. They're reacting. They're operating on pure emotion. Programmed responses, tribal loyalty to a narrative that was deliberately crafted to destroy their own ability to reason. Your friends became indoctrinated twats the moment that Trump ran against Hillary Clinton. And the media made them that way deliberately, cynically, with full knowledge of what they were doing. And now, we're all living with the consequences. Let me lay out for you exactly what the modern Democratic Party stands for. Let me give you a checklist of the positions, the policies, the values that you're defending when you post that sickening rhetoric about ICE and federal immigration enforcement. Let's start with the domestic sins. The things happening right here in America that you're either actively supporting or passively enabling through your vote and your activism. Murdering babies. That's what abortion is. Not women's health care, not reproductive rights. The deliberate killing of unborn children for convenience. And the Democratic Party doesn't just support abortion, they celebrate it. They demand it to be available up until the moment of birth. They fight against any restriction, any limitation, any requirement that might make women think twice before ending a life. Grooming children. The systematic effort to sexualize kids, to expose them to adult sexual content, to confuse them about their own bodies and identities. Drag queen story hours, transgender ideology in elementary schools, books with explicit sexual content in school libraries. The entire apparatus of gender ideology being pushed onto children who aren't old enough to understand what's being done to them. Men in women's restrooms. Men in women's sports. The complete destruction of sex-based protections and spaces, because acknowledging biological reality is now considered bigotry. Women and girls losing opportunities, losing privacy, losing safety, because the left decides that feelings matter more than facts. Crime in general. The defund the police movement. bail reform that puts violent criminals back on the streets immediately, progressive prosecutors who refuse to prosecute theft, assault, drug dealing, the complete breakdown of law and order in cities run by Democrats who believe that law enforcement itself is the problem. Political violence. The riots we talked about earlier. The attacks on people who disagree. The justification of violence as resistance. The celebration of destruction and chaos as legitimate protest. The refusal to condemn attacks on federal buildings, police stations, businesses, and individuals as long as it's directed at the right targets. And then there's something that might seem minor, but represents the complete institutional lying that pervades anything the left touches. Tylenol for pregnant women. The medical establishment spent decades telling pregnant women that Tylenol was completely safe, perfectly fine to take, no concerns whatsoever. And now we're finding out it's linked to developmental problems in children. How many mothers took Tylenol because doctors told them it was safe? How many children were harmed? And who's being held accountable? Nobody. Because the institutions lied, and they're never held responsible for the consequences. Now let's talk about the global sins. The things the Democratic Party supports that threatens not just America, but Western civilization itself. The Islamic invasion, not immigration, invasion. The deliberate importation of people from cultures fundamentally incompatible with Western values who have no intention of assimilating. The protection of Islamic extremism under the guise of tolerance and diversity. The refusal to acknowledge that political Islam represents a threat to liberal democracy. Somali fraud networks. The $9 billion stolen through welfare fraud that we talked about the other day. The money funneled to terrorist organizations, to the complete breakdown of oversight and enforcement, because acknowledging the fraud would mean acknowledging that sanctuary policies enabled it. Unchecked illegal immigration. The open border policies that have allowed millions of people to enter the country illegally. The catch and release that lets criminals like the two we talked about earlier stay in the country. The sanctuary cities that prevent cooperation with federal immigration enforcement. The complete abandonment of border security and national sovereignty. Venezuelan dictators. The left's romance with socialism extends to defending actual totalitarian regimes. They'll make excuses for Maduro, for Castro, for every failed socialist experiment, because admitting that socialism leads to poverty, oppression, and collapse would mean admitting that their entire ideology is bankrupt. Socialism itself, Marxism, the ideologies that have failed 100% of the time that they've been tried, the systems that produced nothing but poverty, oppression, and mass death. But the left keeps pushing them, keeps selling them to young people who don't know history, keeps promising that this time it'll be different if only they're given enough power. And here's the key connection. Wokeism has merged with Islamism to come after the West. The Red-Green Alliance that we talked about in the previous episode, secular Marxists joining forces with religious fundamentalists because they share a common enemy, Western civilization and everything it represents. This is what you defend when you post about ICE being evil. This is what you support when you attack immigration enforcement. This is the package deal you're buying into when you align yourself with the Democratic Party and progressive activism. You're defending the murder of babies and the grooming of children. You're defending men in women's spaces and the complete breakdown of law and order. You're defending fraud networks and Islamic invasion. You're defending illegal immigration and Venezuelan dictators. You're defending socialism and the alliance between Marxism and Islamism. That's the checklist. That's what you stand for. That's what you're actively promoting or passively enabling. And you call people who oppose these things fascists. You call people defending Western civilization and American sovereignty Nazis. You call people who want borders enforced and criminals deported monsters. The projection is astounding. You support every form of actual oppression, actual violence, actual destruction of human flourishing, and you have the audacity to claim moral superiority over people who just want the law enforced and civilization preserved. This needs to stop. All of it. The indoctrination, the lies, the defense on the indefensible, the attack on anyone who dares to speak the truth. It all needs to stop. Let me make this as simple and as clear as possible for everyone who's been posting the rhetoric about ICE and federal immigration enforcement. Stay your asses home. Stop interfering with federal agents trying to do their jobs. Stop blocking roads. Stop forming human shields around convicted criminals. Stop weaponizing your vehicles against law enforcement. The law is not optional. The Constitution is not a suggestion. Federal warrants are not negotiable. When agents show up to remove convicted criminals who've been ordered deported by federal judges, that's what's happening whether you like it or not. Learn to obey the law. Learn to obey lawful orders. If a federal agent or any law enforcement tells you to move your vehicle, you move it. If they tell you to get out of your car, you get out. If they order you to disperse, you disperse. It's not tyranny. It's not fascism. It's basic law enforcement. This is the minimum requirement for living in a civilized society. You don't get to pick and choose which laws you followed based on your political preferences or what the media leads you to believe. The republic is being restored. The rule of law is being reestablished. The criminals and fraudsters who've been operating with impunity under sanctuary policies and are being removed, the worst of the worst, being cleared out to protect American communities. And the darkness is screaming. The people who've benefited from the chaos and lawlessness, who've exploited open borders and sanctuary policies, who've stolen billions in welfare fraud, who've trafficked women and children, who've distributed fentanyl that's killing Americans. They're all screaming because the light is finally reaching them. The politicians who enabled all of this are panicking. The activists who organized obstruction networks are desperate. The media that covered for them is losing control of the narrative. They know their time is running out. They know accountability is coming. And they're trying to use people just like you as human shields. They're trying to radicalize you into believing that resistance is heroic, that obstruction is righteous, that attacking federal agents is justified. They want you to be the next Renee Good. They want you to sacrifice yourself so they can use your death as propaganda. Don't fall for it. Don't let them turn you into a fake martyr for their failed ideology. Don't trade your life for a lie told by politicians who'll forget your name the moment you're no longer useful to them. The federal agents conducting Operation Metro Surge are not your enemy. They're protecting you. They're removing convicted predators from your communities. They're dismantling fraud networks that steal your tax dollars. They're enforcing laws that every civilized nation enforces. The enemy is the people who've been lying to you. The Democratic Party that radicalized you. The media that programmed you. The activists who trained you to obstruct. The politicians who told you that federal immigration enforcement is illegitimate. They're the ones who got Renee Good killed. They're the ones who are setting up the next tragedy. They're the ones with the blood on their hands. Stand with the agents, not the agitators. Stand with the Constitution, not the resistance. Stand with America, not the people trying to tear it down. The siege of the Republic is ending. The rule of law is winning. And no account of riots, no amount of obstruction, no amount of sickening rhetoric on social media is going to stop it. Compliance or consequence. Those are your options. Choose wisely. In the book of Romans, chapter 13, verses 1 through 2, let every person be subject to the governing authorities, for there is no authority except from God. And those that exist have been instituted by God. Therefore, whoever resists the authorities resists what God has appointed, and those who resist will incur judgment. The law is absolute. Authority is ordained. Resistance has consequences. This isn't political, this is spiritual. This is the basic order of civilization that separates us from chaos. Learn it, accept it, live by it, or face what happens when you don't. We're done here.